rural business service. And collectively, we're all interested in bringing economic development to rural communities. And we're broken up into the three actual services. But it's a great program. I'm going to focus primarily on the telecom programs, but there are a lot of other opportunities that rural development offers. If there's something that needs to be financed in a rural community, rural development probably has a program that can serve those needs, from fire stations, tribal colleges, water systems within RUS, housing programs, as was mentioned before. We have a lot of grant and financial opportunities to help with rural communities. So there isn't a program that I speak about today that you might be interested, but you know, the business that wants to come to an area, we have rural business programs. So we'll give you some contact information there. And one of the key characteristics of rural development is we have a field structure, and it's that field staff that makes our programs so accessible to rural communities. And I have two of my staff here. Mary Campanola, if you'd stand up. Mary Campanola works for me in Washington, D.C. She's our outreach coordinator for all the telecom programs. And Richard Jenkins, he's our general field rep. We have about 30 some odd general field representatives throughout the country that work just on the telecom programs. Richard is the person that you would get to know if you're interested in any of our telecom programs, and we have GFRs throughout the country. Also, as I mentioned, we have our rural development state structure. Our state office is located in Richmond, and Ellen Davis Matthews is our state director. She or anyone on her staff would be more than willing to talk to you about any of our programs. And she has a broadband coordinator in the state that can also help you. We have about 6 major programs. I'll just go into these in a little bit of detail. The first program is our telecom infrastructure program, and those are loans to improve and build telecommunication services. That's the program that started 60 years ago, and it's for communities with a population of less than 10,000. And recently, we expanded the program to include funding for E911 services. And we have our rural broadband loan program. This is created in the Farm Bill. Got its start back in 2002, was reauthorized in 2008. And if anybody knows anything about the Farm Bill, that comes up for renewal every 5 years. So if you add 5 to 2008, you know it's coming up for renewal in the next year or so. That program is just to finance broadband. If you're interested in providing telephone services and broadband, you'd come in under the telecom program. If you're just interested in providing broadband services, that's under our broadband program. And we have a small Community Connect grant program. I'll get into more detail on that since the window just opened for that. And we have a distance learning and telemedicine loan and grant program. That doesn't finance the broadband, but it funds the equipment on either end to bring distance learning and telemedicine to rural communities. We have public TV grants and weather radio grants, very small programs, but we can give you more information on those programs if you're interested. Funding available is Nita mentioned. We generally have over $1 billion in loan and grant funds. This year in the 2012 budget, we have $690 million for our telecom program. We have $736 million in broadband loans. Distance learning and telemedicine grants is $16 million, and Community Connect grants is about $15 million. As Nita mentioned, I've got about a $4.5 billion portfolio that keeps me awake sometimes at night. Wondering how the portfolio is operating. Those are all taxpayers' dollars, so we take that very seriously. And we have about $3.8 billion in principal outstanding in our infrastructure program. It's the one that's been around for 60 years. And we have about almost 500 borrowers in that program. And we have about $513 million outstanding in our Farm Bill broadband program. That's the one that started in 2002. That's 73 borrowers. And then the majority of the other principal there is from the Recovery Act. As Nita mentioned, we had $3.5 billion in loans and grants that were made available under the Recovery Act. Community Connect. This is a very competitive grant program, and it's aimed at bringing broadband to the most rural and economically challenged communities. Since its inception back in 2002, we've done 215 grants and invested $112 million. A lot of those grants have been right here in Virginia. It serves communities of 20,000 or less, and something that's very critical is the application window opened on May the 3rd of 2012 and closes on June 18th of 2012. So we're right in the middle of the application period. I don't know if you noticed, but outside on the table, we did bring a copy of the NOFA, if you're interested. That's the Federal Register NOFA that's out on the table. We also brought copies of the application guide. Those are out on the table for you. And some information, we also do webinars on the announcement. This one is for the webinar for June the 7th. There is one May 24th, but that's already booked up, so we have to add another one on June the 7th. But that information is available for you out on the table. And again, the May 24th one is all closed up, so June the 7th is the next one. As I mentioned, it's a very competitive program. This year we have a little over $14 million. Last year we had $13.4 million. We received 140 grant applications totaling $117 million. So it was about a 10-to-1 demand for the program. And we awarded $13.5 million to 18 grantees. And pretty much anybody would be eligible for this except an individual or a partnership. Indian tribes are, state or local government, a co-op. Pretty much all of our programs are open to anybody except an individual or a partnership. The requirements for the program, it can only serve one community. We have very limited funds, so we try to get the money spread around as much as we can. And the community has to be unserved by broadband at the time. So if there's any broadband in half the community but not the other half, you couldn't serve that community with the Community Connect grant program. It has to be the entire community that would be served by the grant. The population limit is 20,000 or less. There's a minimum grant of 50,000 and a maximum of 1.5 million. There is a matching requirement of 15%. One of the nice things that we do with the project is require that there be a community center with at least 10 computers for public use at no charge to the public for 2 years. And free service to critical facilities also has to be provided for 2 years. And it has to offer basic broadband service to residential and business customers within the proposed service area. And again, the NOFA was just published on May the 3rd. I grab my water here.
Will you take the questions now, or do you want?
I think after the presentation. But again, that's information on the Community Connect grant program. Very competitive program, but it's a great program, and it's a lot of times it's the stepping stone. We've done a lot in tribal areas or very unserved areas where somebody gets their start with a Community Connect grant program, then they may come back to our programs and then come in for a farm bill broadband program loan or for an infrastructure program loan. But it's a stepping stone to get people started within broadband and our loan programs. Distance learning and telemedicine, excuse my voice is fading here. DLT, we published a notice on May the 8th. There is no application window for this year, and hopefully beginning of next month we're going to be announcing the awardees for the fiscal year 12 funds. What we decided to do is we had so many applications for the program from last year. Instead of opening a new window this year, we just went back to the list of applications from last year and funded the next ones on the list. Our goal is to publish a proposed rule and make changes to the program for the future. So we thought it was best just to not open the window this year. But announcements will be made in the beginning of June. There was $465 million in loans and grants that have been awarded in total. And again, this one has a population limit of 20,000, a maximum grant of 50,000, minimum grant of 50,000, maximum of 500,000. Again, matching funds of 15% are required. Again, distance learning and telemedicine, we're not going to be publishing the NOFA inviting applications this year. And we do hope to have a proposed rule published this fall. We've had some challenges with the program, and we're trying to streamline it to make the application process easier for both the agency, but more importantly for applicants. So we would certainly welcome comments when that regulation comes out. Nice thing about that program, even though it has a population limit of 20,000, that has to be the end beneficiary. So actually a university or a hospital in an urban area could be an applicant for one of those awards as long as they're providing service to communities with under 20,000. So it's a great way to get first-class education from perhaps an urban area out to rural communities. Okay, our infrastructure loan program. As I mentioned, that's the one that's been around for 60 years. Population limit on this is 5,000 or less, and the loan funds are used to finance telecommunication services in rural areas. It has very low interest rate. They're set at U.S. Treasury rates depending upon the loan maturity. And this is not a competitive program. We accept applications year-round on this program, and we do have funds available for the program at this time. And anything that we do finance has to be broadband capable. Our broadband loan program, this is the one that came out of the 2002 Farm Bill, was reauthorized in 2008, and it's to provide financing for broadband construction on a technology-neutral basis. And again, applications are accepted for this program on a year-round basis, and we have funding available for this program at this time. We've invested over $105 million in Virginia over the past several years for infrastructure development. We've done Community Connect grants, there's a DLT grant, a couple DLT mentions here, and Intellos. Is somebody here from Intellos? Oh, okay. They're one of the BIP awardees. I did want to mention real quickly two other grant programs that we have. They're not part of the RUS programs. They're part of our rural business programs. A lot of times we see startup companies that are interested in getting into broadband, but they don't have the seed money. They don't have what they need to get started before they come in and submit an application. So there are two programs. They're referred to as RBAG and RBOG, the Rural Business Enterprise Grants and Opportunity Grants, that some of our smaller, some tribal awardees have used to get into our programs. RBAG is a grant program that is essentially it's for public bodies, nonprofits, for tribes. The end result has to be to finance or develop a small or emerging private business. So this is a good opportunity to get a small grant to start a company that might be providing broadband in rural communities. This one has a population of 50,000. And it's a little confusing within RD. We have different definitions, and they're all pretty much statutory in RD, but this one is a 50,000. And you can see you can use it for distance learning, revolving loan funds. The important thing is technical assistance. So somebody trying to get into the business that needs some startup money for technical assistance, this is a good grant program to come in under. These are the various grant purposes. You can see loans for startup operating costs, technical assistance, for all things that would be worthwhile to a telecom entity. There's about a $24 million appropriation for it. And this is handled out of our state office. It's not under a NOFA, and you can just go and contact the state office and find out the availability of funds. Applications are scored, but it's not competitive like the Community Connect grant program. And you would get in touch with the community programs director in our state office in Richmond if you're interested in this program. RBOG is a much smaller program. It only has a little over $2 million. But it's promoting sustainable economic development that uses local resources. And again, this is a program that's been used by some of our grantees that have come in under Community Connect. They've applied for these grant programs to help them get started up and come in and apply for a loan to expand. Eligible applicants are public bodies, nonprofits, tribes, co-ops. This one has the 50,000 population limit. And you can see the eligible uses of funds. It's to provide training to do business support, leadership training. It's to identify and analyze business opportunities that will use local resources. So you can see how it could fit into the telecom business. Now, this one is done on a NOFA. It is a competitive program nationwide. The NOFA has not yet been published on this. The NOFA should be out probably in the next week to 10 days. And if you watch our website, you'll find out information on that program. And again, it's about $2.25 million, and the maximum grant is $50,000. Let's see, I can probably. If you're interested in learning more about our programs, again, Richard Jenkins is the GFR that covers Virginia. We also have a broadband coordinator in the state office, and you can find out about RBAG or RBOG, and there is contact information that's out there. A lot of people, particularly when I'm talking about NOFAs or how to apply for the program, they want we call our top 10 list. How do I get money from RUS? So this is just our top 10 list and how you would apply, say, under Community Connector for one of our programs. First step is you want to do your homework. Getting into the telecom business is not for the faint of heart. So you want to make sure you do your homework, know that you want to actually get into the business, do your research. Number 9 is find out what assistance might be available from the governor's office, from the state public utility service, and what other resources are available out there that you could use to leverage perhaps one of our programs. Look at our website. We have success stories for all of our programs. We usually put contact information in there. If you see something that sounds like something that you're interested in doing, you can call up one of the awardees and find out how they started the program, what pitfalls they may have come under, and they might be able to give you some practical experience. Number 7 is to talk to the GFR. I mean, that's what they're here for. That's the beauty of rural development. We have field staff that are there to help you access our programs. And if you can't access our programs, they know of other resources too a lot of times that you can access to perhaps help you with your business needs. You want to make sure you read the NOFA and the program regulation. The NOFA is the published regulation on how the program is going to operate if it's a competitive program. And if it's not competitive, we have a program regulation. Those are the rules of the road. We have to abide by them. You have to abide by them. So you want to make sure you take a look at those. Application guides. As I mentioned, we have a copy of the application guide out there for Community Connect. It's a pretty hands-on, step-by-step application guide. It gives you a lot of general information. It gives you some pointers along the way, things that we've found that have been helpful or that you might want to look at that have been problems for some of our applicants. So we put a lot of information into the application guide that should help guide you in the process. If you're working under a NOFA like Community Connect, the application is June 18th. Anybody know what happens if you submit an application on June 19th? We can't consider it. And that has happened, where we've had people that, particularly in a rural area, that were off to the post office or to their FedEx office to get an application in the mail by the end of the day. Their car broke down or something happened, and they couldn't get it in on time. There's nothing we can do. So make sure you know the deadline, and try to beat the deadline by a couple days. Usually with the application guides, there's a lot of things that we ask for. There's a reason for all of them, even though you may not know the reason why. But give us everything we ask for, even if you don't think it's applicable. We ask for a list of 17 things and you give us 16. you're probably not going to make the application process. Everything that we ask for has to be in the application. Something that's important too is that you need to write the application as if the reader knows nothing about you and the agency. It has to be something that anybody can pick up and understand what you're applying for and the basis on what you're applying for, and all the support information why it's a good proposal. So make sure you write the application as if we know nothing about you and the person looking at it doesn't know anything about the agency. And then one of the most important things that we find is to look at the application individually and as a whole. A lot of times we see applications that come in. You may have like one team working on the technical aspects of the broadband deployment. You have another team working on the financial aspects. You have engineers. You have different people doing different parts. And somebody puts it all together and submits it. And oftentimes, all the pieces don't make sense when you look at them collectively. So make sure you look at all the pieces of the application individually and as a whole. Like for example, we'll see that the technical plans call for the system to be built over 3 years, but we see income coming in the first year. Well, where's the income coming in from if the system isn't going to be operational for 3 years? So make sure you look at all parts of the application individually and as a whole. And this is all the contact information for myself, all my staff in Washington, D.C., and you have the information for Richard Jenkins, and there's a link to all the GFRs throughout the country that are able to help you. And there again is Richard's contact information, our state office in Richmond. That's everything for me. Hopefully my voice will survive for questions and answers.
We can certainly email the presentations around afterwards. So Michael, we'll have you start then, and then we will turn to questions. So allegedly make this work for you. Yeah, so just this for these slides.
Which one?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you again to Nita and to her boss, Senator Warner, for the leadership he's shown on this issue. It's a privilege to be here. And thank you all for coming. I am going to talk about the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission's Universal Service Fund program, which is about a $9 billion program, about $4.5 billion of which each year goes to fund telecommunications networks in rural America. The Commission comprehensively overhauled this program at the end of last year, and so I want to talk you through some of what we did and some of the exciting new opportunities that that's creating. The Universal Service Program, it's not a grant or loan program, at least not in the usual way. So it's a little bit different from what RUS does. It grows out of the Commission's historical commitment to universal access to communications. This was something that was written into the sort of founding DNA of the Commission when it was established in 1934. It was historically achieved through regulation of phone companies and through payments between phone companies. But things changed substantially in the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which has helped convert this program over time to an explicit support mechanism to bring costs down for access to telecommunications for a variety of different kinds of users. The way it works is contributions flow from telecommunications carriers through an assessment on their interstate revenues. You've probably seen sometimes a universal service fee on your phone bills, and that flows into from wireline companies, wireless companies, cable companies that provide voice service into the Universal Service Fund into 4 different programs. High cost, which is about $4.5 billion a year, and goes to fund access in rural areas. Lifeline, which funds access for low-income Americans. E-rate, which funds telecommunications access for schools and libraries, and rural healthcare. I'm going to focus on high cost today. It's by far the largest of the 4 programs, as I said, 4.5 out of the 9 billion, but I'm happy to talk about the others. The program, as it existed prior to reform, had a number of very significant problems, which is why we've been hearing bipartisan calls for reform of this program for over a decade, and why the Commission undertook reform last fall. They sort of fall into 2 broad categories. One is there was significant inefficiency and waste in the program as we inherited. The most egregious example of this was the program would fund up to 4, 5, or 6 carriers providing service in the same areas. There were other similar kinds of problems. So that's number one. Number two, the program was for the most part focused on phone service rather than broadband. It had done a tremendous job of bringing phone service to rural America over the last decade and a half plus. But we obviously now live in a world where broadband is the fundamental telecommunications infrastructure. And so for both of those reasons, the Commission undertook what was essentially a once-in-a-generation overhaul of this program, adopted in October of last year, based around 3 essential principles. One was to refocus this program on broadband, bring robust home and business broadband to the over 18 million Americans who are unserved today, and expand mobile coverage as well, mobile voice and broadband coverage where it's lacking today, while protecting existing voice and broadband service in rural areas. So that's point one. Point two, fiscal responsibility, fairness to the consumers who pay into this fund through the universal service fee, and addressing the bipartisan calls to eliminate inefficiency and control costs. Recognizing that this was a very significant set of changes, the Commission also adopted sort of a recognition of business realities as the fund transitions, attempt to phase in these changes over time. And this is where we ended up. So I'll talk through a little bit of how the program works with a focus on sort of the immediate opportunities. What we did was we started off by taking a number of measures to eliminate the inefficiencies that we'd seen in the program. We said we were not going to send duplicative support to the same area. We weren't going to support multiple providers providing service in the same area. We weren't going to spend scarce universal service dollars where there was an unsubsidized provider providing service. We were going to transition the program where possible to competitive allocation of government money. And we were going to increase the accountability for everyone who received support across the board. Those changes freed up funding that allowed us to do a number of exciting things. So we, for the first time, directed the program to expressly make support for broadband-capable networks a goal of the program. We dedicated support for mobility, making universal mobile service a goal for the first time. And we created a separate mechanism to support the remotest areas. So let me sort of go through these in order. We think about these in terms of fixed broadband. So this is residential home broadband from maybe a wireline telco, a cable company. This is funded, has always been funded, and I'm going to get in the weeds here a little bit under. It's always been funded in the Universal Service Program sort of in 2 streams. One, to larger phone companies called price cap carriers that serve the majority of the lines and has also have the majority of the unserved customers. The other 2 smaller carriers, rate of return carriers. For those who know this program very well, you'll forgive me, I'll simplify a little bit. Historically, the price cap mechanism had done a pretty good job of keeping costs down, not a great job of incenting broadband build out, the rate of return program, sort of vice versa. Hopefully David will forgive me for that sort of oversimplification. But what we did was the following. In price cap, the larger company areas, we fundamentally reformed the system in 2 stages to refocus it on incenting broadband build out. And I'll talk about those in a moment. In rate of return, smaller company areas, we largely left the system the same, but we did create greater accountability for the for broadband build-out for those companies. So starting July 1st, the smaller carriers will have an obligation that receive money under this program will have an obligation to provide broadband upon reasonable request to the people in their service area. That's the sort of home and business broadband side. For mobile broadband, again, we comprehensively overhauled the system, and we're going to put out new funding for mobile service in 2 phases, starting with $300 million through an auction, a competitive bidding process in September, which I'll talk about again in a little bit more detail. And then in the second phase, $500 million on an annual basis to support ongoing support. And then finally, recognizing that within any reasonable budget, there are some extremely high-cost outlying areas that it's cost prohibitive to support with the other mechanisms. We set aside a dedicated fund to look at innovative technologies, other ways of funding the very remotest areas, whether that's subsidizing satellite service, fixed wireless, other sorts of things. So that's the basic structure of the reform. Let me talk about what we've been doing. So we start with Connect America Fund Phase 1. This is the first phase of the reform to bring broadband focused on fixed areas. We launched this at the end of April. We announced, the way the program works, we announced the availability of $300 million, up to $300 million in one-time support to rapidly bring broadband to areas that don't have it today. The way the program works within Universal Service as a whole is the money has to flow to eligible telecommunications companies, typically the telephone companies that provide service in these areas. So this $300 million comes from savings in the program as it exists. And phone companies have the opportunity to accept the money. They get $775 for each unserved location they would serve. And they have 90 days to let us know how much of the support that's allocated to them they would accept. The new funding will come with tough build-out and accountability requirements. So 4 megabits down, 1 megabit up. Speed requirement, latency, usage. Carriers will have to deploy to 2/3 of the locations within 2 years and finish the project within 3 years. This is the sort of first rapid injection of funds, new broadband funds under the reform, and it's very exciting. That's, and so this is, we've put up, as we've done each of these things, maps on the Commission's website. This is a map that builds on the NTIA national broadband map. It shows unserved areas, and you can go online and get a sense of what areas are available for support under Phase 1 of the Connect America Fund. Let me talk now for a minute about mobility. The reforms we did around mobility were, as I said, very exciting. It was the first time the Commission has ever recognized universal mobile service, including universal broadband, as an express goal of the fund. And as we did that, again, we did it in 2 phases. So the first phase will be $300 million in one-time support to areas that don't have 3G coverage today. It will be given out based on a competitive process, what we call a reverse auction. Basically, the way it works is we've announced the areas that are eligible for support, and we've looked at the metric we're going to use as the number of road miles in those areas, which we use road miles rather than homes because it's support for mobile coverage. And so we have carriers come in and they tell us essentially how much they believe it would cost to cover a certain number of road miles. We compare the bids and we fund the bids that give us essentially the best value for the universal service dollar. We announced the rules in eligible areas May 2nd. Applications for the auction are due July 11th, and the auction will actually take place at the end of September of this year. Winners will be required, as it says, to deploy they have a choice of deploying a 3G network or a 4G network, to incent providers to do 4G, recognizing also that, that for some carriers it's a little bit of a longer path to get there. they're required to either deploy 3G in 2 years or 4G in 3 years. And again, if you want to get a sense of where this funding is available, our team has put up a great map on the commission website that you can zoom in, see different areas. It shows you where we think broadband is lacking today. These are areas eligible for support. You can zoom in, you can mouse over and see the number of road miles and so on in each area, and this will be used as the basis for the auction. So that's those two $300 million programs are sort of the immediate infusion of funds under this reform. So now let me talk a little bit about what's next. So the way the fixed program, phase 2 of the fixed program, will ultimately work consists of 2 parts. So we are currently in the process of doing a comprehensive modeling exercise to estimate the cost of providing broadband service across the country. As we complete that process, we will say to each of the phone companies who serve, the incumbent phone companies who serve a state, who are the eligible carriers under the program, we'll give them a choice to accept what we call a statewide broadband commitment. So for the amount of funding we estimate it should efficiently cost to deploy it, they will can take that funding and will be required to serve all the supported locations in their service territory across the state. So essentially to bring broadband to all their locations across the state. If the carriers, we hope many carriers will accept. They may not all. We intend to strike a hard bargain to make sure we get good value for our money. To the extent carriers decline to make that commitment, we will go to a competitive process to serve the areas where the existing incumbent carrier has said they're not willing to provide broadband. That's ongoing. The Commission's October order aimed to get the model completed by the end of this year, and that's the target we're still shooting towards. That's for, again, the home and business, the sort of fixed location piece of the puzzle. Similarly, for Mobility Fund, we have $500 million that will be available for ongoing support for extending mobile networks. Unlike the $300 million, which is sort of a one-time shot in the arm, this would be an annual revenue stream, and will be awarded either through a modeling process like what we're doing for home and business broadband, or through reverse auction like we're doing in September, in part based on the learning we get in September. And that will be that will happen, again, we're aiming towards the end of this year, early next year. And then finally, the Remote Areas Fund. So we're working on implementing those 3 pieces of the puzzle. And then a number of other significant implementation questions the Commission is working through, and subsequent rulemaking proceedings and follow-on orders by the staff. And any sort of major reform of this type, there's always a lot of tweaks to be made, adjustments, follow-on questions to be answered, that sort of thing. So that is the Universal Service Fund overhaul that we did. Like I said, this is just the rural piece. We also have low-income schools and libraries funding, as well as rural healthcare, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those in the Q&A.
Great, so we'll start questions, and just so everyone has a sense of the timing, our plan is to go till about 2:05 or maybe 2:10 and give everyone a few minutes before Senator Warner arrives at 2:15. But if there are a lot of questions, then we're happy to accommodate them, and we'll of course get you contact information for the appropriate representatives and copies of the slides. So, would anyone like to start? Otherwise, I can ask them questions too, which they may not like. Please.
Can you define rural?
Rural is hard to define. We have about 40 major programs at rural development, and most of them have based upon the statute that they originated from. So I worked in the housing programs, they came from the Housing Act. The programs that I have now in telecom, they come from the Con Act. So it all depends upon the law. Recently, though, we were asked to provide the Elwood comments on, should there be one definition of rural, and should should that definition be? So there is some consideration being given to having one definition for all of our programs, but most of them are designed, you know, for a particular program, like our business programs tend to have a higher population than some of our other programs. So you can see some sense to it, but you have to be careful and look at each program that you're interested in and see if the eligible population.
And just so everyone knows, I think the definition you're referring to is going from 20,000 to 50,000. Is that right? Is that a more consistent number, or is it a different issue?
That's one of the considerations.
Okay.
To increase it, the highest population limit that we have for our program is at 50,000. And one of the lowest one is our infrastructure program at 5,000. So the consideration of 50,000.
Is there any distressed component?
Well, the part of the whole formula would be is we would have that as the population limit, 50,000. Sorry, spoken over there too, but is to have the whole, go up to the 50,000, but then there would be point scoring, so there would be targeting. So you get more consideration if you go to a distressed area or to a more remote rural area. And you would probably tailor those by program.
Great. And I think the other point of the discussion is the Senate is getting ready to consider the Farm Bill, and that's where some of these conversations are happening. So if you're curious about that. Sorry, I think I saw your hand first.
I have a question about community. Would that be synonymous with locality, or can a locality include a smaller area kind of?
Community is it's incorporated in that, so it'll be the whole community.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we're considering changing for the future, because right now we require an entire community, and some people have said, well, you know, we'd like a more regional approach or a different approach to it. So what we're going to be proposing in the future is to change the definition. Right now it has to be community.
Great. On the far side of the room.
Up on that, here in Virginia, and I see a number of counties represented. The town in the county, or one or two of the towns, we have DSL, but then the county, which is a separate jurisdiction, doesn't really have deployment. How would that work if we have the pockets of DSL in the middle of the county?
Well, if there's any broadband there, it gets excluded under the current rules.
So would the
Except
county
as-
just apply and exclude those areas?
As long as it's a community that's unserved, that could come in as an application. But if part of a community, what's commonly referred to as the defined limits of the community is served, even if it's by DSL, that community would be out. Imagine we only have about $14 million for the program, so we try to get it to the areas that have no broadband at all.
I mean, I think the consensus of the folks sitting here is that there really is DSL typically available to the towns, but then the county-wide, which is a separate jurisdiction, it just doesn't exist at all.
And that's-
And that exclusion then excludes counties that I'm seeing sitting out here.
And that's one of the considerations that we have. That's another rulemaking that we're going to be taking on, is to change the definition for the community program. And that was authorized in the Farm Bill also. So that will be changed statutorily when the 2012 Farm Bill comes out. But we'll be putting out a notice of proposed rulemaking and accepting comments. And those are the type of comments that we want.
And I think on the policy side, these are exactly the kinds of issues that we would love to hear from you all about. The senator's been engaged in discussions with both RUS and FCC. And I think that you're right, that the questions that we get the most often in the Senate office is this issue of kind of, whether it's a checkerboard or whether there are communities that are neighboring, where, some folks have high-value broadband and other people have 256K modem, which is almost kind of a joke, and it's not sufficient. And I think for the senator, at least, he probably doesn't, he does not think that that would be an acceptable baseline. I don't know if you could maybe talk a little bit about the kind of the
Right.
speed question, but.
Right now, the speed is 200.
Okay.
What FCC had previously defined as broadband.
Is there any discussion about kind of having that develop over time, or is there some way to index that, I guess is really what I'm asking. But.
Yeah, that's the one thing we want to do definitely, is to publish that annually. Right now, it's published in the Federal Register, the 200 speed, so we're stuck with that. We can't change that annually in NOFA. And in our Farm Bill broadband program, for example, we don't have any speed requirements in published reg, but we publish in NOFA every year. We envision that the speed requirement for that will increase over time. So that is one of the considerations.
Okay. Peter?
I'm with Loudoun County, and with respect to the FCC Connect America program, we have areas that are registered. We just participated in the Accelerate Computing program. We have 1,000 people. We have Eastern Loudoun, which has the largest number of data centers, and we have Western Loudoun, which is very agricultural. So we have the haves and completely have-nots. And I'm wondering if providers like Comcast qualify for those FCC dead zones in Western Loudoun County. They apply to provide that to the citizens that have no service.
For the way the statute is written for us, we have to provide service to what's called eligible telecommunications areas. That can include cable companies, if they apply in the state, and also include phone companies. The way we've set up the program with respect to the home and residential, home and business broadband, so fixed broadband, we've given the incumbent, the phone companies, in many cases, the first bite at the apple. And that's, we have on the one hand the principle that we wanted to allocate this money competitively to the providers possible. We had on the other hand sort of a program that existed today, a set of networks that existed today. So the $300 million that we're making available in the short term will go to the incumbent phone company. So probably not Comcast, but whoever the phone company is that serves that area, whether it's Verizon, yeah. So Verizon, has a certain amount of money allocated to it within the program, and it will have to choose in the next 90 days, a little bit less than that, whether or not to accept that. I'd certainly encourage all of you to reach out to your carriers, encourage them to accept this money. That they'll be making, I guess, a business decision, but at the same time, I think knowing exactly what they want to see the money accepted, they want to see the carriers partner, invest some of their own money to bring broadband to the
And that's actually exactly why we have carriers in our second panel to kind of start some of those conversations. Our hope is whether it's in Community Connect or the Mobility Fund, that there might be some relationships out there, some companies that you're not familiar with, or maybe who aren't familiar with you, where we could, there are companies that do want to build out, and there are obviously communities in Virginia that want broadband, and so we're hoping that we might be able to encourage some of those partnerships. And if you think the Senator Warner's office can help, please let me know or let Kelly Mercer know. And thank you, by the way, for saying which county you're from. If everyone else could just, for our guests here, let them know which county, or if it's a county they might not know, maybe tell them where it is. I saw your hand wave before, so.
I'm from Clark County.
Great.
I'd like to reinforce the change of definition, because an awful lot of our county is not served today, but there are little pockets in town. And the second question I have is associated with your definition of broadband. I heard you say, 200 kilobits. So does that say any county, any place location that can get a satellite-based system is excluded from applying for these?
It's terrestrial based, so satellite wouldn't be counted against that definition.
Okay, so it is definitely terrestrial.
And it's just for Community Connect, this grant program that's open right now. And again, that will be publishing a proposed rule for, probably tie into the Farm Bill, and will be accepting comments on making changes to that, but it's just terrestrial based service.
John McCarthy, Rappahannock County. Question for Mr. Steffen. The mobile grant program you're talking about rolling out, so you have a mobile provider that is permitted to several facilities in that county that is going to roll out 3G and install new technology here. And once you showed the map of the areas eligible for its funding, here are all of the facilities slowly completed in that sweet spot. So I'm wondering, having permitted them over a year ago and having reminded them several times that you can get one of their permits and leaving nothing but an echoing distance out of them, could they still be eligible for that funding even though they've already had facilities permitted?
So what we've set up a number of safeguards to do the very best we can to make sure the funding goes to support areas where it wouldn't carriers wouldn't be building anyway, recognizing that it's not going to be perfect in an instance where we're trying to get sort of a rapid injection of funding. What we've said is, so first of all, we built that map using commercial data. And we gave all the carriers an opportunity to say either we're serving here, or somebody else is serving here, or we're not serving there. So we ran sort of a challenge process. And the map I showed you is the result of that. So that's sort of the starting point. Then we have a set of other requirements. We're not allowing carriers to bid for funding in any place where it's in their corporate build-out plans to build within the next 3 years. And we've also excluded areas where carriers made an enforceable commitment to a government entity, whether it's us, whether it's NTIA, whether it's Department of Agriculture, whether it's state or local government, that those areas won't be sort of double funded. And if the bid came in and we discovered that there was this problem, it would be.
Well, simply having a permit from local government doesn't constitute enforcement commitment, so.
Right. There may be a different
They
situation
can be
in that
installed
case.
there,
Yeah.
something explains a lot, right?
Sir.
Back to the Detroit, Virginia, Accomack, Northampton County. I would like to reinforce the regulatory changes in two areas. One is the speed limit. Understand your complexity in the whole country, the areas that have no terrestrial service of any kind whatsoever. For them, even 200K or a DSL line would be a massive improvement for those areas. In much of what we're dealing with in this room today, and other people are welcome to chime in comment their turn, but for us, we have areas of our county that have broadband under the current definition, and they have DSL available. However, your programs, like you had talked about, community connection, has to be higher defined community. Between your area definitions and your speed definition, you exclude most of our areas that need broadband built. Between those two definitions, we end up in a catch-22 situation of being excluded. And you're doing a lot of your programs based on mapping at this point. Maps for our area are horribly inaccurate, and I have seen nothing published yet about a clean, easy way to submit corrections to those maps. Because the maps are coming from the carriers. So your maps show my area as having DSL, and they show my area as having wireless coverage. I defy you to get a signal of either of them in my location. And on top of that, the carrier has ceased making investments, apparently. Rumor, of course. We have less than 6 central offices covering the entire area. The rest of the area is served out of smaller wiring centers. Some of those wiring centers have DSL slams and some don't. Where there are DSL slams, they're full. No one can get on until someone moves or dies, and there's no more investment being made. So when you tell me, as someone who's working very hard on the county's economic development right now, that we've got broadband and we can attract businesses with broadband, it doesn't apply. They can't come in and get service. But your map says we've got service. And to the extent that we can help you in your regulatory process, we have to address those two issues. We have to address speed that is not high enough to actually attract the business. And we have to address mapping that you're basing your programs on that don't tell the whole story. So to the extent that we can help you, we will. But those are two areas that absolutely have got to come at the top of the Farm Bill reauthorization, or the reauthorization doesn't do much for a lot of it.
We are changing the Community Connect regs, so the speeds will definitely change. They were put in a regulation years ago, and they're a bit outdated. On the mapping, we don't use the National Broadband Map for programs. If there's a community in your area that you think may be eligible, you can contact Richard. We can't help you with an application for a specific grant, but we can help you determine if that area might be eligible for the program. And we actually go out to those communities, but for all the Community Connect grants, it's we make actual boots on the ground that determine that. For all the Recovery Act awards, we actually have our field staff verified. And we agree that the map doesn't always have this granular data for most of those areas. And we've been working with NPIA for that past year.
And I just had heard that Senator Warner is going to be is pulling up now, so he'll be joining us in just a minute. But Pat, that might be something where we can work with y'all. We've actually talked to RUS a little bit about some mapping issues that the state of Virginia had also raised. And I think if other people have feedback on that, especially, really like granular details, please let me know. I've got all my cards out there. You can email Kelly if you know her, and she'll get the questions to me, and we can kind of go from there. Sure, yeah, of course.
On that thing, which is to say, we don't have field staff the way RUS does, and so we are much more dependent on the national broadband map in terms of administering our program. So to the extent you can work with your state, it's very important for us to get it right, that is accurate as possible, and
Right.
to the extent you can work with state mapping authorities to fix those problems. We're hopeful that, historically, at least at the federal level, the map has been used as an information gathering exercise. We are now starting to use it, and it's influencing disbursement of funds. The hope is that that will give carriers an incentive to get it right, but we do need your help.
And one of the policy issues out there is Virginia actually has a better map than the national map. It's at the address level, which means all the data is very granular. And part of, again, to your point, Pat, because the national map is at the census block level, there are areas that look like they are fully covered, and in fact, they are not. And of course, if you live in that community, you know that. But people in Washington, may or may not know that. But I think there are some folks who are interested in, or because we've been bugging them about this, have heard from us already, and we would be really happy to kind of continue that conversation. I just wanted to see if we can get in a couple more questions, please. Yes, sir.
Floyd Thomas, Caroline County, about 10 miles south of this building. I think it was Mr. Villano mentioned that the distance learning program, which I think most of us in here are county folks and things like that, we can work with schools and we can kill two birds with one stone. Did I understand you to say that it is not being opened this year and you're actually awarding things from last year?
Correct.
Now, I don't know about you, but I couldn't do that in my county. I mean, you're the federal government, so I'm gonna assume you can, but I couldn't do that in my county. Is that normal?
Most of our programs are very oversubscribed, 10 to 1. So we had so many eligible applications last year. We had, I believe, almost $80 million in fundable eligible applications for the program. So we decided this year, since we're changing the rules, we're in the process of developing changes to them, that instead of going out with a new window and then publishing the proposed rule and confusing people with changes in the program and new applications, we would just go back and go to the next ones on the list that we couldn't fund last year. And instead of having them go to the expense of reapplying this year, we would just fund those. The announcement on those we made probably the beginning of June, and then next year we should have new regs in place and the program and move to next year.
No new applications
No
until
new
13.
applications.
Until 13 at least. Thank you.
Right, at the back of the room.
Well, Mr. Stefan, during your discussion of the mobility fund, as far as I understood, you said there was some reference to use of road miles as a modeling input. I didn't quite understand that.
It's not a modeling input, it's the way that we'll be evaluating bids. So in other words, the way this process, the competitive process, it's the use of what we call reverse auction. It's an innovation in the policy space. It's a way to take scarce dollars and fairly efficiently distribute them to where they can do the most good. The way we've done that is we mapped, as you saw, the areas where we believe there is in service. And we've asked carriers to come in and say how much money they would need to cover those areas. And as we're weighing the bids against each other, the metric that we're going to use is essentially dollars per road mile. We're using roads.
Why not population per square mile?
Well, so one way you could do it would be to do dollars per home. We looked at that, and there's a fair bit of correspondence between roads and homes, but in any event, there's also roads go to workplaces, and, community anchor institutions, things like that, and in addition, people just want, mobile coverage on the roads themselves, and so.
People that are legally can't operate while they're driving.
The text message, yeah, that's true, it's true. I mean, kids on school buses, things like that. So,
Is it secondary roads or just primary?
it's most roads, so I don't have to, but it's.
Probably not unpaved, but
Yeah, I don't know the exact definition, we can get back to you, but.
Wait, just real quick, can we get one last question? And then we'll turn to the senator.
The risk of mixing apples and oranges. And has there been any thought at the FCC or in the U.S. with the public safety broadband requirement, where the goal is to have a nationwide 4G network, and spectrum, license spectrum, public safety? And it strikes my mind that if that investment is being made by public safety, and their coverage standard is like 98, 99%. I mean, you want the Calvary to have voice communications and data communications in most rural areas. And if there's an ability to align federal dollars that's trying to get mobile broadband to residents and businesses, then there's got to be some opportunity for shared infrastructure, not spectrum. Calvary, but sharing infrastructure, backhaul, microwave backhaul, power fiber, power control. Is there any thought about that?
As the public safety network process rolls out, we're very focused.
But there's got to be an opportunity to align with the